President Biden vowing to win the November election amid speculation about his campaign. That says he's ramping up efforts to target battleground states. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more from the president's rally today in Madison, Wisconsin.
Campaigning here in the key battleground state of Wisconsin, President Biden again vowing to stay in the race.
That some folks don't seem to care who you voted for. Well, guess what? They're trying to push me out of the race. No! Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I'm staying in the race.
Biden also highlights issues such as abortion, democracy, and the economy.
How about the 200,000 jobs we announced yesterday? You think I'm too old to beat Donald Trump?
While here, Biden also taped his first TV interview since the debate with ABC, which will air at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. All these efforts were announced by the White House this week in a bid to show that a president is out in the public and has the ability to prove his record.
I'm not letting one 90-minute debate wipe out 3.5 years of work.
Some Biden supporters here told me that they're closely watching the president's performance these days to see how he's doing. But many others told me they're supporting him as the Democratic nominee, no matter what.
Well, I've heard a lot of people speaking today about that very thing and how they are watching.
Dangerous. We know what we have in Biden. You don't know what somebody else might bring to the table.
You can't just switch horses in the middle of the stream. Who would take over?
I think we're pretty late in the game here. We wouldn't want to turn away people that are already on the fence of even voting in the first place, right?
President Biden's campaign on Friday announced what it calls an aggressive travel schedule in which Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris will travel to every battleground state this month, with Biden expected to engage in, quote, frequent off-the-cuff moments. His campaign is also launching a $50 million advertising blitz targeting battleground states and events such as the Republican National Convention in 10 days here in Wisconsin. And next week, Trump will rally in Florida and Pennsylvania, while President Biden will hold a press conference at a NATO summit in Washington, D.C. before getting right back on a campaign trail with a swing through the Southwest. Reporting from Madison, Wisconsin, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The actual state of the post-pandemic economic recovery may be unclear, but more jobs are being added and the unemployment rate is rising to its highest level since November of 2021. Unemployment has increased now for the third month in a row. Today's labor report showing unemployment ticking up to 4.1%, though it's still much lower than the 6% levels we saw during the pandemic. Job creation in June exceeding expectations at 206,000 jobs added, due mainly to a surge in government employment, 70,000 more government jobs, followed by 49,000 in healthcare. New data also showing that hiring slowing down last month. This means the job market is cooling, which is good in the eyes of the government because a hot job market could keep inflation elevated. Some economists say this is indicative of the soft landing that the Fed was hoping for as they hiked interest rates to slow down inflation. So what does this new data mean for the current state of the economy? Some economists saying we're nearing a recession, while others say the recovery is going well. To get some insight, we're happy to bring on our next guest, Jeff Ferry, who's a chief economist at the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Jeff Ferry, great to have you back on the program.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
Jeff, an interesting situation appears to be emerging in the labor market right now. You have unemployment claims at historic lows, but the number of people collecting unemployment benefits is at a high, the highest since 2021, actually. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it's clear the labor market is cooling down in response to the higher interest rates we've had for 2 years now. The employment totals at 206,000. That's actually a pretty moderate number. And unemployment edging above 4% tells you that there are now significant numbers of people losing their job. So we've got a cooling market. We've got moderate economic growth. We're not in a recession, but growth is very cool. And, I think that's what it looks like for the next few months until the end of the year, I'd say.
And I think a lot of people have been watching the housing market because of inflation and interest rates. Some economists say that some cities are entering a crash phase. What is a crash phase, I guess first and foremost, and do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I do think the housing market is in trouble. I mean, high interest rates have raised the cost of mortgages for everybody, and people don't want to move. And so it's much harder now to sell your house than it was a couple of years ago. I think, but interest rates are at a volatile point. I mean, I think I agree with those economists who say later on this year, interest rates are going to start to fall. So you're going to see a change and a reversion back to a normal housing market. I mean, I don't think we'll see a serious crash in the housing market because I think interest rates will come down. House prices have been pretty robust. And so the turnover, the sales in the market are likely to resume.
To your point, Jeff, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said earlier this week that it looks like we're on a deflationary path, but that more data will be needed before they can actually cut interest rates. What kind of signs do you think experts are looking for before that cut actually comes?
Well, I think this morning we got a pretty good sign in that not only was employment growth only 206,000, but over 100,000 was cut off previous month's figures once they're revised. And unemployment up to 4.1% is also a good sign. So I think if you're somebody who's waiting for interest rates to fall, today it looks more likely that will happen in September than it did yesterday. So that's a good sign. The inflation figures in May were not bad either. I mean, CPI at 0 is good. It's still 3.3% above a year ago, and there's still a widespread view that prices are too high right now. So, I think that the Fed's actually done a pretty decent job of bringing inflation down after a disastrous period in 2021.
And to that point, do you anticipate the economy will ultimately have a soft landing like the Fed was hoping for when they started raising interest rates?
Yes, I do think there's a very good chance of a soft landing. I mean, the inflation that happened in 2021 was due to a couple of things. One was the fiscal policy of the government. The other was the supply chain shortages in terms of the difficulty of getting goods over from Asia. Now, that unwound itself over time. So that enables the economy to get back onto a stable path for prices and economic growth. So that helps you move towards a soft landing without some sort of crash. I don't believe those people who are talking about the possibility about that we're almost in a recession now because the unemployment rate has moved up to 4.1%. I mean, the labor market is very volatile. We've got literally millions of immigrants who come into the country who show up in some of the data from the BLS and not in other parts of the data. So the unemployment rate is not as significant as it once was. So, it's a complicated situation here. I think the Fed is doing a pretty good job. I think if we can get through this election in November, I think there's a good chance we can get onto a more stable economic path.
Jeff Ferry, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. Always good to talk to you.
Today is Amazon's 30th birthday, and company founder Jeff Bezos appears to be planning on selling $5 billion worth of his Amazon shares. And it comes after the stock hit a record high. Bezos disclosed the proposed sale of the 25 million shares in a regulatory notice that was filed after the market closed on Tuesday. Amazon stock also hit an all-time high during that day's trading session. Following the sale, the Amazon founder would still own 912 million shares, which is nearly 9% of the company. Bezos unloaded over $8 billion worth of the shares earlier this year. A spokesperson for Amazon has declined to comment. And pro-Palestinian demonstrators were arrested at rallies in New York City and Philadelphia on the 4th of July. NYPD saying they arrested dozens of people after public property at New York City's Washington Square Park was vandalized. Video showing graffiti in support of Palestinians written on what appears to be a park monument. Police said more information will be released as the investigation continues to unfold. Police in Philadelphia saying they made a few arrests outside their city hall on Thursday. That's where video shows protesters gathered and waving Palestinian flags. They began burning what appeared to be an American flag on the street. One officer was injured and taken to a local hospital. And a Chicago City Council member is backing a measure that would ramp up penalties for masked criminals. This as violent crime in the city has reached new heights over the past year. On top of the standard punishment, Democrat Alderman Raymond Lopez proposed 10 days behind bars, a $5,000 fine, plus more than 100 hours of community service. The penalties would apply to both minor infractions and felonies. Violent criminals in Chicago crimes went up to nearly 8% during the past year, with robberies making up more than 37% of all cases. In some incidents, suspects having been wearing masks or hoods. Aside from Illinois, officials in several other states like New York and North Carolina are also seeking restrictions on wearing masks. Meanwhile, in California, a measure to impose tough penalties for theft and drug offenses will soon be on the ballot. Voters will decide whether to bring back harsher penalties at the ballot box come November. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.